Muraho,
Hoi.
Hola.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahoy.
Sveiki.
Привет.
Hello.
Ciao.
Salut.
Hello.
And welcome to Policy Voices by Friends of Europe, an independent think tank with a difference. Each week from Brussels, we bring you powerful conversations with policy voices from around the world. Policy Voices talking policy choices.
Ukrainian cereals are a danger now for European market because European market is not ready to absorb all Ukrainian cereals. We have to recognize that Ukrainian cereals cannot come on European market, but even we don't need for that. And even Ukraine don't need to export their cereals in European Union if we help them to keep their traditional export market in Asia, in Middle East, and in some African countries. On the long term, we will reinforce the role of the European Union, the geostrategic role of European Union in the world with Ukraine integrated in European Union.
And we are worried, and we're quite right to be worried. I mean, this is a very, very critical moment. So I don't envy those who are in power. You can detect moments in history when important movements take place, and I reckon this is one of them. And I think I wish us a lot of luck.
Hello and welcome to Policy Voices, Friends of Europe's weekly podcast on European and global affairs. I'm your host, Katerina Villanova. So much has happened in the first half of this year, and to take stock of where we find ourselves now, Dharmendra Kanani, Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe, spoke with Dacian Cioloș, former Romanian Prime Minister and former European Commissioner for Agriculture, and Pauline Neville-Jones, member of the House of the Lords National Security Strategy Joint Committee. This will be the last episode of Policy Voices before we come back in September, so please take a moment to follow us now, wherever you get your podcast, to be notified as soon as we return. Here's Dharmendra Kanani's conversation with Dacian Cioloș and Pauline Neville-Jones.
Pauline, Dacian, thank you both for joining Friends of Europe's Policy Voices podcast at this juncture of the year. It's almost a stock take, I suppose, of the first 6 months of the year. At the time of airing, it will be end of July, and we won't know what else is ahead of us by the autumn, given all the things that happened in the first 6 months: the snap election in France, the colour of change in Britain and the UK, and potentially a change of government again in the United States. So we're at this midway juncture, and I thought, what better to have both of you are trustees, both of you have very distinct experiences. Pauline, in the upper house, you've been involved in defence, in setting the strategic agenda for the UK as chair on defence. Dacian, you've been Prime Minister, you've been an MEP, you've been a Commissioner, so you've been at all parts of the European Commission's architecture, but also heading a member state. So I thought, what better to have two of you having a conversation with me about the way where we find ourselves in the world. So I just wanted to get a sense of your stock take. Firstly, Pauline, what do you make of where the UK finds itself now? It was interesting that Macron calls it snap election, and you're holding your breath and thinking, okay, what will happen in the UK at the same time? And this is kind of strange. It wasn't symbiotic, but similar question about desire for people seeking change. Pauline, what's your take on what happened in the UK, and what do you think might happen as we move ahead?
And I suppose one of the things that's happened in the UK is that we move left, whereas some of the dominant views elsewhere have been actually movement towards the right. But do not imagine that the UK has been immune from that, because one of the reasons why the Labour Party has emerged with such a very large majority, which in truth it may find difficult to handle because it's much harder to keep discipline in a very, very big majority party, is because the vote on the right has been split by the last-minute emergence and campaign of so-called reform, which isn't identical to, but it certainly resembles some of the right-wing forces, both in continental Europe and indeed in the United States, which cut into what would otherwise have been a conservative vote. So we've ended up now as a very relatively small party, and we will have to rebuild. We have a reconstruction task ahead of us. And one of the questions, obviously, for us in the future is exactly where the soul of the party will lie. Now, I'm very much a centrist, and I shall want to see the party pull back towards the centre and rejig its agenda in that light. But we are on a new path. It's a path in many ways which makes life with the Democrats in Washington actually marginally easier. There is a relationship between the Democratic Party and the Labour Party. And I hope that the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, is going to be able to profit from that. And I hope also they've indicated, I think rather cautiously, and I don't think they will be very adventurous, but I think they do want to see, and I would certainly support them in this, a change in the atmosphere of, and indeed I hope some of the actual construction of, the relationship between the UK and the European Union. We have some, I hope, quite positive prospects ahead of us, none of them easy to execute, but with some promise.
Dacian, you've been Prime Minister, you've been Commissioner, you've been MEP, so you've kind of seen this beast of the European project from various vantage points. We're talking about Europe having shifted significantly to the right in a way that you and I would, and the three of us would never have imagined happening at this point in the century where we find ourselves. And the fact that we are now once again courting an ideology that was really quite dangerous in the 1920s and 30s and onwards, which led to the most disastrous context for Europe. Yet we're witnessing it return. Now, from your perspective, given what's happened in the Netherlands, given what's happening, Orban is now open about his intentions, and we know that, the relationships he's maintaining and keeping are, especially now we've now got the sense that Le Pen, absolutely going to be courting a relation with Orban in the parliament. We have a range of issues that are emerging across Europe. What's your take on how that's come about? Is that because politicians have simply dropped the ball?
Don't forget that this connection or this reaction of the people, of citizens to the politicians is not new. Just remember that after Brexit, let's say even Brexit was interpreted in a certain way, a reaction of the people to the behavior of politicians. I remember in 2016, I was Prime Minister in Romania, and David Cameron organized a tour in several European capitals in order to ask for support in European Council for some modifications in the European legislation, for more opt-outs for UK, or anyway for some advantage, to sell this British advantage in the public debate in UK in order to have a vote against in the referendum. And I remember I had a discussion tete-a-tete with David Cameron, and I asked him, David, you are not afraid by this decision to organize this referendum? It's anyway dangerous. And he said, look, Dacian, don't worry, we will win. UK will remain in EU. But you, as a Prime Minister of a new member state, I think you can understand better me. I'm not happy with the way that European Union is run it, so I need to push for some changes, and I use this opportunity to push my colleagues in the Council for some changes. He played with the fire in a certain way. He lost, and after that, it was a mood in European Union. If you remember, in 2019, just before European elections, that it will be a wave of extremism and anti-Europeanism in European elections in 2019. It was not the case, but unfortunately, my feeling is that we didn't took the lessons after these elections. We have a very, very low level of debate about Europe, supported by the national governments in EU member states. And the European Parliament don't have the power, the force, the capacity to support this kind of debate, also because we still have a European Parliament, but national lists for elections. And with national and regional lists, we have national and regional debates in electoral campaign for European elections. We don't have a real European debate. So we have this lack of democracy, and a lack of confidence of the people in so-called liberal and democratic political parties at EU level. So what is the alternative? To vote illiberals, to vote those who are in opposition from a very long time. Because if you look, these extremistic parties who are voted, no one of them were in the government in the last 20, 30 years. So in my opinion, they were voted not because they are, or not only or principally because they are Euroscepticals, but because they are anti-system. They are anti-system because they are not perceived as being part of the system because they were not in the government. Let's look on two cases in Europe with Poland and Italy. In Poland, PiS, after arriving to the government, they isolated Poland. And some years after, the liberal parties, Tusk, who is well known in Poland, arrived again to the government. So the people understood that the extremists they are not a solution because they isolate, they block the development, and they isolate the country inside of European Union. And the other situation in Italy with Giorgia Meloni, if you compare his narrative in the electoral campaign, a very strong anti-European one, and now the behavior being in the government is completely changed. She's open to cooperate now with others. She became again more open to European decisions. There are no solutions other than to work together at EU level. But when I say work together, we really should work together with the people and not only among politicians, because otherwise, if we are not able in the next, let's say, 10 years to change the governance system, I'm afraid that our democracy will be strongly affected by the lack of capacity of political parties and the politicians to adapt to new realities in the society. And this is, we talk now about Europe, but in my opinion, this is not only a problem of Europe, it's a problem of all democratic world.
Indeed, and you've given us a very thoughtful but gloomy prognosis and outlook. There's a lot in what you've said, but there's a sense that everyone's talking about this multipolarity and polycrisis, and it's almost as if like we're all waiting for someone to step in and sort this out. There seems to be a vacuum of let's say, the type of leaders that we've counted on in the previous century that have been thoughtful, or a collection of leaders that have come together and said, this is the kind of world we want to be living in post-Second World War, the creation of the welfare state in the UK, or the kind of New Deal for Europe, if you like. And I suppose what you're pointing to is that there's a kind of democratic deficit within the actual core of the European Union and its project. And what we need is a kind of different type of democratic deal with citizens. Otherwise, we're doomed, because actually it's not going to work. Because I'd like to take your view of this is just a very short response to recently 6-7 men decided on the top jobs in Europe. Is that the right way of doing things?
The problem is not whether we will have not 6, but 20 people, or even, I don't know, tens of people deciding on the top jobs. It's about the legitimacy of these people who are running for top jobs at EU level. What we say now is that in order to be better qualified to run for a top job at EU level, you should be a former prime minister. But a former prime minister doesn't represent Europe, represent a member state. We still have a conglomerate of the member states running European Union, not a democratic elected European Parliament or other institutions or democratic instances representing the people and to influence these decisions.
Pauline, given the kind of things that have happened in the UK, you've spoken about that. As you look at the relationship with the EU and you look at what's been happening in Europe, as you mentioned earlier, Europe hasn't been unscathed by the populism and the far right. There's elements there which cannot be left aside, otherwise we will rue the day, if you like. What's your sense? You've been involved in defense matters for many, many years. There's something coming together of the economics, politics, and instability of our world, insecurity. What's your kind of sense of how that will play out in the next 6 to 12 months or even further ahead? What's your take on that kind of combination, that nexus of politics, economics, and security?
My starting point is that I actually entirely agree with what Dacian said and his analysis. It seems to me that's profound and right. Also, my background, you may not know this, but I was chief de cabinet to the Budget Commission for 5 years, long time back. But I've spent time actually in the institutions. Looking at what's happened, it seems to me that one of the things that the European Union as an organization has to realize is that the more power is concentrated at the center, and the more decisions of importance which affect daily lives of European citizens are taken in Brussels, and that, produces reactions, the more people ever view about their control over it. And I do think that one of the things we see is this right-wing force represents a sentiment in people as they don't any longer feel entitled citizens in their own society. I mean, I've just been in France, and there's very strong feeling among those who voted, many of them for the first time for Rassemblement. And the prohibition against voting for Rassemblement seems to have disappeared. People feel, I've tried everything else, doesn't work, going to try these guys. Whether there'll be a revenge vote later on as a result of the maneuver that's taken place, which has brought to the fore the left rather than the right, remains to be seen. But it does seem to me that these actions do have consequences. And I think the other thing one shouldn't forget is, particularly in Eastern Europe, is that Eastern European countries and the ex-Warsaw Pact countries had their identity suppressed for a very long period of time during the Soviet Union. Is it welcome not to have, in a sense, full nationalism, full repossession of one's traditions, but see power depart? I think those have consequences. And so if you put all these things together, you can see why the right, which has different causes in different countries, nevertheless, it produces in the end this very strong message about identity. And so the European Union really has to tackle, it seems to me, the whole business of how it exercises power. And that's where Dacian's right. You've got to invent new mechanisms. I think revenue sharing, that old term about how you spend money, is absolutely on the agenda, particularly when it's about social Europe, but also how the institutions actually come together, and whether this recipe of basing institutions on national mechanisms to produce something at the center will go on working, indefinitely. Don't know, because it's very hard to make a transition. But I do think there are some very big institutional challenges which are going to be very much exposed if we ever get to the day, which I hope we will, when the whole issue of Ukraine's membership of the European Union, which is a very different economy, comes to the fore and has to be decided. I see that personally as a moment when the UK may re-enter the scene, but that's a different issue.
Both of you, ironically, given your political leanings, are coming together in terms of the kind of agenda for change, but the fact that you want to see a more social Europe, want to see a reformed Europe, and actually deal with some of the shibboleths that have underpinned how the union is operating. And I think the most important thing here is that, do you think, I don't know how close you've been, Pauline, to some of those in power currently, but Dacian, you've had dealings with Kaya. Kaya is an absolutely, formidable player. She's done extremely well in Estonia. She's one of our European Union leaders. You have meteoric rise to power. She's now going to have that foreign affairs minister for Europe, let's put it that way. And then you've got Costas from Portugal, relatively unknown, publicly, but the chap's going to be the council, European Council mover and shaker. And you've got continuity in von der Leyen. Do you get a whiff even that these players are interested in actually making some kind of root and branch change because they see what you both are seeing right now as to a very, very gloomy picture of Europe and the world ahead?
Well, I don't think I know either of the individuals well enough, and the context in which they're operating is obviously difficult. What I do think is that there must be an awareness among people in office at the moment that they do have to accomplish transformation. It stares you in the face that we cannot go on as we are. I certainly think that's true of Starmer. Whether he'll get it right is a different matter. But I think there is an awareness of that. I'd be very surprised among political sensate people if they don't have some view of that too, more broadly. And that provides, I think, something of a basis for a more intelligent discussion, not following the traditional tram lines, but trying to explore around them and outside them, and how one can move our societies forward. I have to have some optimism in the good sense of goodwill and honesty. I mean, because I think one of the things that is a feature of the scene at the moment is both incompetence, but also sort of rather dishonourable evasion of the issues. No, we've got to start behaving differently. And this is an area where democracies must begin to heal themselves. Because if we don't heal ourselves and we don't actually begin to perform and use our institutions properly, we are not going to win the other battle that we have, which is the autocracies and indeed their aggression. Challenges are enormous, and that would be my other area of preoccupation. There's some important decisions to be taken, obviously in the short term, about the armaments that we supply, and in particular how we increasingly protect Ukrainian airspace, which has been an issue right from the beginning. And NATO has moved cautiously and slowly and rather carefully, and there are some very big issues, of which the most notable, obviously, is the nuclear. But I think it's become clear that we do have to give the Ukrainians more firepower than they've got, both actually defensive, but also actually their ability to hit targets of the relevant kind and obeying the rules in Russia, and not just Crimea. That's one set of very big issues. And the other long-term set of issues is how we manage our relationship with China. And frankly, we ought to have a Western, not just an American or just a European strategy. We need a Western strategy. We all learned the lessons, of how during the Cold War, the NATO allies, and it's now the European Union, the US, and some countries like my own, which need actually to be pursuing common policies, not just policies that are broadly similar, which is actually where we're going at the moment, because they aren't the same. And we need to try, and in particular, the one that's really difficult is how you get the balance between how much you onshore, how much you continue to trade, and what you continue to trade, and what you actually decide, is not going to cross the line. And those are very, very important long-term issues of real significance. And they will both determine, to some extent, how we manage the economic equilibrium, because I think that's what we should be talking about with China. I don't think it's a question of holding down China's right to be a prosperous and advanced society. It's a question of how you get equilibrium and how you ensure that political systems, one would hope for liberalization there, but we won't get liberalization unless we have a relationship with them. So I think these are very, really long-term philosophical and power challenges. And we're not talking to each other inside the democratic world nearly enough about them.
Pauline's touched on what needs to happen almost, that little manifesto of change. Let me just bring you in terms of your response to some of the points she's made about the security agenda, but also, what role, some of the characters that we've now been picked. What's your sense of how they will grasp the nettle of a change that's required?
For me, the biggest risk in Europe is whether we will turn European agenda to the 27 national interests, or we see the challenges and instead to try to find out-of-the-box and constructive solutions at EU level to work together, as we did for COVID, for example, after I remember 1 or 2 weeks of isolations of the member states, when some member states tried to close the border and to solve the problem inside. And 1 week, 10 days after, they understood that they can manage alone. So they were more open to cooperate. So now, at a different scale, I think we are in front of us the same risk, the same danger. In the parliament, including in the parliament, with some political group, the trend more moved to the right. Even if we see the behavior of EPP, they are preparing to work closer with ECR and with right and extreme right in order to refrain some European reforms and European projects. The same behavior will be in the Council and with some member states. And just to give an example, for me, some challenges can be solved on the short term in a defensive way, or can be solved with a vision on the long term, having the courage to push European Union Act at EU level. Talking about Ukrainian cereals, just to give an example. Ukrainian cereals are a danger now for European market, because European market is not ready to absorb all Ukrainian cereals. And This is now, and we see this not only in the Eastern European countries, but also in the Western countries. I have seen that the subject of enlargement, Ukraine and agriculture, was on the agenda in electoral campaign in France, in some discussions in Netherlands, even in Italy. I have heard about it. What is the defensive approach? Let's block Ukrainian cereals to enter in European market, and that's all. Ukrainians, they can manage, in my opinion, offensive way to manage the things. And I made some proposals directly to von der Leyen and to some European leaders on it as former Commissioner for Agriculture and former Minister of Agriculture. I think that if we manage in a visionary way and out of the box this subject, we have to recognize that Ukrainian cereals cannot come on European market, but even we don't need for that. And even Ukraine don't need to export their cereals in European Union if we help them to keep their traditional export market in Asia, in Middle East, and in some African countries. And helping Ukraine to do that, not only we support them economically, but on the long term, we will reinforce the role of the European Union, the geostrategic role of European Union in the world with Ukraine integrated in European Union. Because European Union is now the biggest exporter, food exporter in the world in terms of value, not of quantities. In terms of quantities, US is still the biggest exporter. But with Ukraine in European Union and with production capacity of Ukraine, if Ukraine keep international market, European Union, enlarged European Union will become a kingmaker and a key player at international level. And we know how much food influence geopolitical decisions and geopolitical relations in the world. So European Union can regain his role in Africa, in Middle East, in some part of Asia, if we play in a smart way this what is now a challenge and a problem for European Union. But this means to approach Ukrainian problem out of the box, in an open mind, to reform our internal policies, not only for that, but taking into account this situation, and to approach the negotiations for accession with Ukraine, not in a bureaucratic way managed by some civil servants from the Commission, but at political level with a clear commitment and a mandate for some top-level politicians, special envoy for Ukraine, for example, in order to try to find, in parallel with the reforms that we'll have in EU now, with the multi-annual budget, with reform of CAP, defense policy, other economic policies, and in parallel with the negotiation of accessions with Ukraine and Moldova, and to try to find out-of-the-box solutions for this specific case. And then we can turn what could be a risk for European Union and to block enlargement process, we can turn this in an advantage if we are visionary.
It's so heartening to hear what you say, in the sense that it is positive, and I hope our viewers and listeners think the same. That it's the first time someone is saying, view Ukrainian enlargement as an opportunity. This will only benefit Europe as a whole. It's not going to, marginalize Europe or affect national interests, but it could be a win-win situation across the board. We have long argued that enlargement should be viewed as the conclusion of the peace project that the EU represents. And it's just never got round there. And I like your idea of a political settlement, because there are hundreds of civil servants negotiating chapters day by day with each Balkan country. What a waste of money.
Excuse me, not only waste of money, I know, because I was involved in the negotiations between European Union and Romania, both on European Union side in the delegation of EU delegation in Bucharest, but also on Romanian side, being at that time advisor to the minister in the Ministry of Agriculture. And there is not only a problem of waste of resources and money, but also a perception of the people about European Union. The perception of the people in the Eastern European countries is about a bureaucratic European Union, because those who negotiated on behalf of European Union with their politicians in their countries were civil servants. In several situations, a director from the EU Commission or a director general was in front of a minister in Romania or in Poland or in front of a prime minister, and the legitimate politician negotiated with a civil servant because this was the mandate from European Commission. And this, in my opinion, is now a big problem. And as Pauline has said, that at the moment that we have a feeling in the Eastern European member states that their identity is not took into account in European decisions. And this is one of the reasons why the extremism and nationalism has raised in these last years in European Union, because the feeling was that we have a second-hand EU member states in European Union, that the decisions are concentrated in the western part of political leadership, and the Eastern European countries are only followers. And there is a complex of inferiority in Eastern European countries. And this is also because of the way that the negotiation for accessions were managed by European Union, delegated this to the European Commission and some civil servants without a political commitment and the political leadership at EU level, of course, of the level of the Council, but mainly of the level of European Parliament. So I hope that this will change with Balkan countries, with Ukraine and Moldova, but especially with Ukraine, because Ukraine risks to be a problem if we are not able to find out-of-the-box and adaptive solutions.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is, and you make this point, well, all I can say, let's hope that someone wise within the union makes you the commissioner for enlargement. We may have more success, Dacian, if you were to be at the helm. No, really, because you're right. The politics of the situation is not really grasped, and it's made transactional. And as you say, it is about chapter by chapter rather than starting with a political negotiation and then letting the rest of it flow out. Pauline, you made that kind of interesting comment that, it's important that Ukraine is brought in, and at that point, perhaps the UK could also join the fray. What do you mean by that?
It may be in the end, that the UK is destined to remain outside the European Union. I regard this, and I don't think I'm alone in the UK, as unfinished agenda. I think it's unlikely in the short term, but when you've taken a big decision of this kind, and the Labour Party, and indeed Dharmendra personally, was very unhappy about our departure. And I think he is a man who would really like to, see us in a different position. But he's chosen not, I think, and I think wisely, not to raise this issue as a primary goal for the UK in the foreseeable future. And instead, there will be, I hope, some overtures and some changes, but I think they'll be at the margin. You have to, in a sense, regrow, your political culture domestically before you can then embark on another try, put it that way. So, as I say, I don't think it's for now. However, I do think, when I look at the European Union, is I do not see how that the promise that's been made to Ukraine that they will have membership can possibly be avoided. This is not, I think, something that the European Union can duck. And when this negotiation takes place, which will alter the political shape of the European Union, as well as its economic base, and I don't personally see how the common agricultural policy in its present form can survive. And there will have to be a different structure for agriculture. But that's beside the point. It seems to me that the opening up to a much bigger country than the geography of most of the others who have joined, the cultural diversity that it's going to bring is going to raise the issue again of, well, oughtn't we to be thinking about other relationships? The UK is a big country to be standing apart from its continental neighbours. And I think that it will also alter attitudes in the UK. Do we really want to remain on the sidelines of something which is so big and such significance in terms of the governance of our continent? So I think that what are we talking about 10 years from now? And this war, sadly, is not going to end soon, and it'll take time. I also do think that Macron has seen this. He's the man who's invented political Europe. So I think there's thinking there, even on the part of France, So that I don't think I'm alone in seeing doors open at that juncture, which we may not walk through in yet, but that there will be an opportunity for, and indeed a need for, a rethink. So that's really, I'm not saying anything more profound than that, but there will need to be political and structural changes at that juncture.
Indeed. But as you said before, there's an absolute time demands right now of our leaders to think about common policies and a common front on the major, both existential, but political and economic challenges, the defense and security challenges that the world faces. And you cannot go it alone, is the message in that sense. But, what you're saying, I don't think we've got 10 years, because I think the force of history and circumstance may pull UK and others into a different kind of situation. Because if we just look at the past 4 years, Pauline, in terms of COVID, etc., the crises are shorter, parallel, and serial. And so perhaps, adversity will bring this new political community to a different. Briefly, as we kind of come to the conclusion of this, let's look ahead and let's look at the potential of a Trump return. Dacian, what do you think that will mean for Europe? And we've all been thinking about what that might mean for the world. But from your perspective, you've been inside the machine, if you like, and you've witnessed some of the discussions that have happened with Trump.
I think what is clear now for Europe is that Europe should define his own vision on how to deal with defense and security, and having stronger capacity than in the past to do that, not only because Russian aggression in Ukraine, but also because of this unpredictability coming from the other side of Atlantic. We have to develop and to give consistency to this concept of strategic autonomy. What means that? In which way we have to reorient and develop our economy to be able to still reinforce this partnership with the US in terms of new technology, for example, in terms of fight against climate change, decarbonation of energetic sector, but of economy globally, but to be ready also to work and to progress on it, even without a very strong appetite coming from US leadership to do this together with European Union, and to take into account what is now a reality, a de facto reality, this multipolarity of the world. With or without Trump, China is there. European Union should deal with China, if possible, in good understanding with US, but otherwise, anyway, European Union should find a pragmatic way to deal with China. We should have to be able to deal also with the situation in Ukraine, even with a big risk, that decommitment coming from US. And I think, let's say, we have to be ready this year, before of the end of the year, with what we will decide in the next weeks, with the new political program of the next commission and the next parliament, to be ready to deal with the big challenges with or without a strong partnership with UK. And I think this is a very strong lesson for European Union compared with the past, when every time it was unthinkable for European Union to project themselves without a strong partnership with United States. Now we should be ready for that, not because we don't want this partnership with US, but because we have to understand the new reality in United States. So my short conclusion is we have to be ready for both scenarios. And if we are ready for the pessimistical scenarios, if we will have a favorable leadership in the US, this will be an advantage for European Union, for the United States, and I think for other partners, democratic partners in the world.
Thank you. Pauline, last words to you.
For the first time, I do somewhat depart from what Dacian just said. I certainly think, we may end up in a situation where the European Union decides that strategic autonomy is the thing it needs to go for, which implies a degree of separation from the Americans. I don't think that's the best option. If I believed that the European Union had all the resources, the will, and was prepared to spend the money, on its own security, the security of our continent, which I don't believe is the case, and I don't think we actually have the means, I think it's a dangerous option for that reason. It may be one that we fall for in the end. My bid would be, even if it was Trump, was to say to him, let us please work together. Let us try a partnership. I would certainly be pitching for working together. Now, that is a self-interested position for the United Kingdom, because we find ourselves in a very awkward situation. But I have to say, that if we were obliged to choose between a strategic autonomous Europe, quote unquote, and partnership with the US, we would go for partnership with the US. So there are some real parting of the ways, potentially, in all of this. I don't actually think that's not desirable for us. So we have a very strong interest, obviously, in partnership, which may not be equally shared by others. But I also think it's the better recipe for us all. Will it be easy? No. I think it's something that we should certainly be aiming for in the first instance. And we need to work out, obviously, what we would put forward as being our contribution. And that's where the European performance at the NATO meeting and subsequently inside the alliance is actually quite important political signal of our seriousness of intent and purpose in the world. I think we do need to be careful about our relationship as Europeans with the United States, between now and the rest of the election. We mustn't, I think, appear to suddenly all bank up behind the existing president, because his opponent will notice. We have to play it really carefully and not get ourselves involved in appearing to be players in an American choice. So I think the next few months are quite critical, and we need really sensible, mature behaviour. And we are worried, and we're quite right to be worried. I mean, this is a very, very critical moment. So I don't envy those who are in power. You can detect moments in history when important movements take place, and I reckon this is one of them. I think I wish us a lot of luck.
Indeed. Thank you for making that point, because you couldn't have put it better. It's a moment, there's a sense of force of circumstance in history that we're at that point again, where something significant and is going to shift, or it will be done to us, whether we like it or not. What we all know, though, is that if we take the past 4 years as a signal and a proxy for the future, we don't know if another bug is going to be about. We see already the impact of climate change that's taking place. We know across the world, public sector debt is the highest it's ever been in history. Highest ever been. And we know unemployment amongst young people is high across the world. And to put that into a heady mix, digitalization, disinformation, and the changing nature of, let's say, the modus of industry and production, which will become digitalization. Whoa, that's a heady mix ahead of us. So I think if there's any leader out there that thinks that they can go it alone, they are foolhardy and foolish in their forward look, because actually the force of circumstance and adversity will force us to collaborate, like it did over COVID. Climate change is happening right now, and the impact of the floods that are taking place are going to affect economies. They won't be able to do it by themselves.
Thank you for staying on that side and listening to Dharmendra Kanani, Chief Spokesperson at Friends of Europe, speaking with Dacian Cioloș, former Romanian Prime Minister and former European Commissioner for Agriculture, and with Pauline Neville-Jones, member of the House of the Lords National Security Strategy Joint Committee. If you want to comment on this episode, you can search for Friends of Europe on LinkedIn and X, or send us an email. Our address is press@friendsofeurope.org. Policy Voices will be taking a break for the next month, but you can always revisit previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us to be notified as soon as we're back. I'm Caterina Villanova, and I'll be with you again in September. Until then, have a great summer.